stand in awe of the Almighty God, the one who really spoke, who spoke and separated the light from the darkness, the one who put within us a heart and tells it to beat, and put within us lungs and tells those lungs to breathe, and the one whose voice absolutely thunders across the earth, where it thunders to the chains of injustice are being broken and the captives are being set free. He's the one who we stand in awe of. He is the one worthy of all praise. He's the one who actually holds today in the very palm of his hands. And I was thinking the other day, we're told not to worry about tomorrow for there's enough going on. So where you're trying to worry about tomorrow, just rein that right in right now and just say, God, you're the God of peace. You're the God who holds my every breath, my every heartbeat, my every day in the very palm of your hands. And so that is where I'm going to stand. And I just realized the mic's in my lap. So let me just correct that right now. I was actually doing some other things and I looked at the time and went, oops, there we go. So I was trying to turn on the lights and get the computer ready and apparently threw the mic in my lap. So anyways, let me just start again now that the mic's up where it belongs. We have an amazing God, and we stand in awe of that wonderful, wonderful God, the one who breathed, who spoke and separated the darkness from the light, the very one who tells our heart to beat and to beat again, and who gave us lungs and tells us to breathe. The one whose voice thunders over the earth, the one who sets the captives free, the one who breaks the chains of the oppressed. That is our mighty God. That is the God that we serve. And as we dive in today, we're actually going to talk about Naomi. We're going back to the book of Ruth. And, here we go. Every single one of us has disappointing seasons of life where confusion sneaks in. And it seems like as that confusion sneaks in, it brings along a buddy. And that buddy is often called hopelessness. So confusion and hopelessness camp out at our door. And then they bring along bitterness. And we can, in these seasons, we can actually keep putting one foot in front of the other. We can even journey back physically and emotionally to a place where happiness once existed. But even on the journey, we find that confusion and the hopelessness and even the bitterness, they just seem to come along. It's like they attach and we can't seem to get free of them. And so again, we're going to go back to the book of Ruth today, and we're actually going to talk about Naomi. And to bring us up to speed, Naomi, her husband, and her two sons, they moved from Bethlehem, the land of bread, to the land of Moab, and they went due to a famine. Okay, that's why they moved. That's why they changed positions. There's all sorts of speculation in the commentaries about whether God told them to go and they were going according to his plan, or whether they were just trying to find an earthly solution for an earthly problem. And so therefore they left the land of bread and went to a foreign land. The truth is, all we know is that they went. Okay. And so they were there long enough that Elimelech, which was Naomi's husband, that he died. We also know that her two sons married Moabite women, but after those marriages, both of those sons also died. In other words, of those who made their journey from Bethlehem to Moab, Naomi was the only one left. And not only that, but she was also the only one left from her immediate family. So there's a sense of loneliness, there's a sense of isolation, there's disappointment, there's bitterness. All that comes in, all the questions of why would have been surrounding her. And if Naomi were here today, I'm going to pick on the body of Christ a little bit, okay, including myself. If Naomi were here today, many would want to begin to quote verses at her, such as Psalm 68:5, where we're reminded that God is the defender of widows. That is a truth. That is a biblical fact. God does take care of the widows, okay? But and in verse 6, he goes on and he says, I'm going to put the lonely in families. So we have two powerful promises of the word of God right now there. But remember, to a hurting heart, we have to be careful how we speak. We have to be present and we have to listen. And eventually we know that as we love them, as we're there present with them, they will come back to that spot. But it is a journey and it is a process. So here's Naomi, who in this moment being told that, probably would have been more like rubbing salt in the wound. That's just not where she was at. She was not denying God, but she was saying that this was his fault. She was definitely putting all the responsibility and the blame on God. So let's listen to her words in Ruth 1. I'm going to read verses 19 to 22. It says, so the two of them, that would be Ruth and Naomi, continued on their journey, and they came to Bethlehem, and the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi? The women asked. Don't call me Naomi, she responded. Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me? So Naomi returned to Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in the late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. Okay, let's go back. The entire town was excited. It was stirred up by their arrival. The gossip mill was going. The rumor mill was in full swing. Some of the translations actually say that the town was stirred, and that word stirred is actually derived from a word that means to throw into disorder or confusion. So beyond that, we don't know the reaction. Okay, that little town of Bethlehem could have been so stirred that they were full of joy at seeing Naomi again. I'm sure there were a ton of questions as far as Elimelech and the boys. Where were they? What had happened? They also could have been full of judgment because you know what? They had stayed and endured the famine, whereas Naomi and her family had actually left. And they also could have been greeting her with great concern and comfort and just welcoming arms and hugging her and letting her know she was home and she was safe. The thing is, we don't know, but we do know that no matter what the tone, she was gone long enough that there were major changes the whole way around. There were major changes in that when she left, she had Elimelech and her boys. When she came back, she had a single daughter-in-law. We know she had aged. We know that she had experienced a lot. We also know that there would have been changes that happened within the town of Bethlehem itself. I'm sure some died from the famine. Others survived it. People would have been married, had children. A lot had changed the whole way around. So again, if we go back to Naomi, her name means pleasant, right? But she says very specifically she wants to be called Mara, which means bitterness. If we go back to that verse, she actually says, do not call me Naomi. Do not call me Naomi. She did not want to be reminded of the pleasantness of her life. And often in times of pain and suffering, we do not want to be reminded of the days of pleasantness. Okay. Instead, she's actually embracing the bitterness. She's putting on a new label. She's saying, instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made my life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Now, this is really important. This name Mara and the bitterness and this label of bitterness that she's trying to put on, it's really important because I want to take us all back to Exodus. Okay. So in Exodus 15:22-24, it's when God's people, they're journeying through the wilderness. They're on their way to the promised land. At the beginning of Exodus 15, they're actually singing, they're rejoicing, they're praising God for taking them through the Red Sea. They have seen the army coming behind them. God has defeated that army. The Israelites crossed through the Red Sea on dry land. The sea closed over Pharaoh's army. They have seen their release. They got out of Egypt. They got across the Red Sea, and they're full of joy and they're singing. And then they come along, and they come to the spot. They're thirsty. They're dehydrated, but the water's not fit to drink. We're actually told it's bitter, and the name of that place was Mara. Okay, it's that same word that Naomi is attaching to her life, and so they go and they grumble against God because the water's bitter. Another parallel is in Job 27:2, where Job says, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter. So with the Israelites, they're complaining about the water, the bitter water. With Job and Naomi, they both state that God has made them bitter. Okay, it's a very specific statement there. With Naomi, she places the blame squarely on God. End of story. In this moment, when she's saying, call me Mara, she sees only lack, and she has come home with emotional poverty or emotional and spiritual famine. Okay, she's a woman that's steeped in pain, and that the bitterness is just overwhelming her. Interestingly enough, in the midst of all this, she has not lost her faith in God. She has him very much woven into the fabric of the story, and I don't want us to miss that because, she's saying God is responsible for this. Like, he's still there. I mean, she still knows who God is. She still acknowledges that he's in control, but she's forgotten who he truly is. And in our in our seasons of sorrow, in our seasons of bitterness, in our seasons where life gets difficult, we can forget the wholeness of who God is. So in other words, she left due to a physical famine around her, but she came home with a spiritual famine going on within her. She came home in a season where God seemed to be personally hidden. And it was difficult. It was quiet. Again, it was bitter. But what we need to hear is this was a season. It was not a sentence. The problem is, or the challenge is, that when we're in the middle of these seasons, they can seem like, they can feel like, and everything in our head can tell us that it's a life sentence, and it's a way that our lives are always going to be. And I think that's what was happening with Naomi when she comes back to Bethlehem and she encounters everyone, small town, and and they come around her, and she's like, don't call me Naomi, because God has made my life very busy. Call me Mara. And so she had forgotten that in the physical and in the spiritual, we can move through seasons. Okay. One of the things I notice about the book of Ruth, which I love, and this just accounts to the power of friendships. I'm taking a little bit of liberty here, but I sat there looking at it, and I'm like, you know what? Here she is coming home and saying, I'm full of bitterness. Call me Mara. But you know what? Other than that statement, all through the book, she's called Naomi. It looks like that name never sticks. Like the people of the community, I'm going to make an assumption here, never call her that she's always Naomi, that she's always called back to that place of pleasantness. And so even in the difficult seasons, we need those around us. When we're declaring a life sentence over ourselves, we need those around us who are saying, oh no, I'm going to call you back. I'm going to call you back to the person that God created you to be. I'm going to call you back to the fullness of who God has said you are. I'm not going to let you stay in that place of bitterness. I'm not even going to let you drink that bitter water, because you are to be who God's called you to be. I'm going to call you back to the fullness. I'm going to call you back to the plenty. I'm going to call you back to the very DNA and the plans and the purposes that God has for you. I'm going to walk with you, and I'm going to call you back. And that's what I saw as I looked at the rest of the book of Ruth, because I searched through it. I was thinking, nowhere was she ever called by the name she put on herself. And as I went through, I read the entire book through this morning. It's short, but I didn't see anywhere at all where that name ever stuck. It could not stick. And so there are names that we try to put on ourselves because of the circumstances, because of the feelings of the moment, because of a life situation, a very painful life situation. She buried her husband and she buried her sins, and she was in a foreign land. It was a very, very difficult season. But in no way, shape, or form would the people around her, when she went back to Bethlehem, let that name stick. They called her back, and God was calling her back too. Because here we go. We can get stuck with the how could God let this happen to me? What on earth happened? It's my soul is so bitter. That's my label. But we have to shift from the how could God allow this to happen to me, or the whys, to God, help me usher in a new season. Help me walk with you to usher in a new season. When we go back to Exodus, when the people grumbled about the water because it was bitter, God met them in that moment. He met them in that time of thirst, and he made that water drinkable, or he made it sweet. Okay. God has the full capacity to meet us in those bitter places and to make life not just bearable, but sweet again. And he's a God who keeps his promise. So if you're going through a difficult or a bitter season, remember, it's a season. It's not a life sentence. That's really, really important. You can just say right now, it's a tough season. It's not a life sentence. Okay. It's a difficult season. It's not a life sentence. It's a bitter season, but it's not a life sentence, because we have a promise that God will turn it around. And it may very well look quite different than what we ever envisioned. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee it's going to look different, but he's faithful, and he will turn it around, because it's a season and not a sentence. If we go on in the book of Ruth and we look at the end, where Ruth has, she gives birth to Obed. Okay, this little tiny baby, and that baby is placed in Naomi's arms, and she holds that baby close, and the women say to her, you know what, God has given you a daughter-in-law who's more precious, basically more faithful, more fulfilling than seven sons. I mean, like they even multiply the seven sons because they're looking ahead into a future that they don't even understand, because Naomi, in her pain and in her bitterness, brought back a woman who would walk with her through the rest of her life, who ended up married to Boaz, who gives birth to Obed, who gives birth, and Ruth ends up in the lineage of Jesus, because Naomi, even in her pain and even in her bitterness, hung on to God the best she could. And the others, when she came back to Bethlehem, all I could say is they came around her. She began to see differently again. She began to see the provision of God. She began to look at life differently, and her heart began to beat again, and she began to live again. And she walked into a new season because of the promises of God. So right now, my word to you, if you are going through a difficult season right now, it is a season. Do not take on the label of bitterness. Do not take on the label of poverty. Do not take on the label of less than. Do not take on any of those negative labels. If those labels do not align with the heartbeat of God, with the kingdom of heaven, do not take them on. Decree and declare that this is a season. It's not only just a season, it's a season that I walk through. Reject the life sentence of that season, and hang on to the promises of God, the faithfulness of God, that he could take that bitterness and he can turn it into joy. I imagine that when Naomi held that little baby in her arms, there was no bitterness to be found, because her heart was rejoicing at the goodness of God. Because as hard as that bitter season was, as starving as the spiritual season was during that time, God still showed his faithfulness. And that's what she walked in the end. Job saw the same thing. Actually, the people, the Israelites who were roaming through the desert for all those years, they also ultimately, the generation, saw the faithfulness of God. We will see the faithfulness of God, because our God says, you know what? Those difficult seasons, they're not a life sentence. You give them to me and let me work through them. You guys take care. Have a great day. Be so blessed. Please share this. We want to continue to spread the word. And also, again, podcast Real Truth with Ruth. Go on my website, ruthhendrickson.org. All sorts of stuff on there for you. You guys be so blessed, and keep just pressing into the fullness of God. Do not let a season define you. Let the Lord define you.